It was a cold Tuesday evening in Buffalo City, New York. Rain poured relentlessly, bouncing off the pavement like tiny sparks under the glow of streetlights. Inside a black luxury SUV, Prophet Matthew Wilson sat in silence. A man whose voice filled stadiums. A man whose prayers were broadcast across America. A man people called a living miracle. And yet, in that moment, staring through the rain-streaked glass, he felt nothing. "Traffic's backed up near Elmwood Avenue," his driver said, glancing through the mirror. "Probably another 40 minutes to the arena." Matthew nodded slightly. "I'm in no rush," he replied quietly. But the truth was he wasn't in a rush to get anywhere anymore. Not to the stage. Not to the crowd. Not even back to Cabana Mancio, the mansion that felt more like a museum than a home. Then suddenly, "Sir, look, the SUV slowed. Under a flickering streetlight, in the parking lot of a Wegmans grocery store, sat a small figure in the pouring rain. They say faith can move mountains. But what happened that night in Buffalo? You need to see it for yourself. But before we continue, hit subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from and which part of the story hit you the hardest. I believe this story found you today for a reason. Now let's get back to the story. At first, it looked like just another shadow. But then Matthew leaned forward. It was a little girl. No umbrella. No jacket. Her clothes soaked through. Her hair dripping. And yet, she wasn't running. She wasn't crying. She was kneeling. Hands clasped tightly together. Eyes closed. Lips moving softly. Praying. "Stop the car," Matthew said. The driver hesitated. "Sir, it's not safe out there." "Stop!" "The car." The tires splashed hard against pooled rainwater as the SUV came to a halt. Before anyone could react, Matthew pushed the door open. Cold rain hit him instantly, soaking his tailored suit, but he didn't flinch. His eyes were locked on the girl. He walked slowly toward her. The rain roared. Cars passed. The city moved on. But she didn't move. Not until he stood right in front of her. "Hey!" Matthew said, his voice softer now. "What are you doing out here?" The little girl opened her eyes. They were calm, peaceful, strangely unafraid. "I'm praying, sir," she said. Matthew glanced at her trembling hands. "In this weather?" he asked. "Why not go somewhere warm?" The girl smiled gently. "Because some people don't have anywhere warm to go," she said. "So I stay out here and pray for them." Matthew felt something shift inside his chest. "But what about you?" he asked. "Aren't you cold? Aren't you hungry?" She hugged herself slightly, but shook her head. "I am," she admitted. "But if I ask God for food, I'll just be full for a night." She looked up at him. "But if I ask him to help everyone, maybe nobody has to be hungry tomorrow." Silence. The rain kept falling. The city kept moving. But in that moment, a billionaire prophet stood speechless, in front of a homeless child who had nothing, yet somehow had everything he had lost. Matthew slowly knelt down, right there in the rain. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man with answers. He felt like a man who had just met one. "Please," he said quietly. "Come with me." The girl looked at him, then glanced around the empty parking lot, and gently shook her head. "I can't leave yet," she said. "Someone still needs me to pray for them." And just like that, everything Matthew thought he knew about faith began to fall apart. But what Prophet Matthew Wilson didn't realize that night was that this moment, this rain, this girl, this prayer, wasn't just a coincidence. It was a collision, because just a few hours earlier, inside the walls of Cabana Mancio, his life told a very different story. The mansion sat quietly on the outskirts of Buffalo City, massive, spotless, untouched by the chaos of the world outside. Marble floors, glass walls, chandeliers that cost more than most homes, and yet it felt empty. Matthew stood in his private study, staring at his reflection in the window. Behind him, rows of books lined the walls, sermons, theology, leadership, influence, everything he had ever taught. everything he had ever built. And somehow, none of it felt real anymore. A soft knock came at the door. "Sir," his assistant, Daniel, said carefully. "The media team is ready. They want to confirm tonight's message for the revival." Matthew didn't turn around. "Tell them." "I'll improvise." Daniel hesitated. That wasn't like him. "You always prepare, sir." Matthew gave a faint, almost bitter smile. "Maybe that's the problem." Hours later, after the rain, after the encounter, after the moment he couldn't shake, Matthew sat in the back of his SUV again. But this time, his mind wasn't on the crowd waiting for him. It was on her. "Find her," he said suddenly. The driver glanced in the mirror. "Sir?" "The girl. From the parking lot. I want to see her again." By morning, his team was confused. Security footage. Local inquiries. Questions sent through nearby shelters. "Sir, with respect," Daniel said, standing in his office the next day. "She's just a homeless kid. We have bigger priorities." Matthew cut him off. "No," he said quietly. "We don't." They found her that afternoon, near the same Wegmans. Same corner. Same quiet presence. This time, she wasn't in the rain. She was sitting on a curb, sharing a small sandwich with an older man. When Matthew approached, she looked up and smiled like she had been expecting him. "You came back," she said simply. Matthew nodded. "I had to." He crouched down in front of her. "What's your name?" "Ruth Hilton." "And where do you stay, Ruth?" She shrugged lightly. "Around." Daniel shifted uncomfortably behind him. "Sir, maybe we should—" Matthew raised a hand. "Not now." He looked back at Ruth. "Why do you do it?" he asked. "Why pray out here, in the cold, for people you don't even know?" Ruth tilted her head slightly, like the question itself didn't make sense. "Because they need it," she said. "But what about you?" Matthew pressed. "What do you need?" She smiled again. "God listens when people really mean it." The words landed heavier than they should have. Matthew leaned back slightly. "You really believe that?" "I don't just believe it," she said softly. "I've seen it." Daniel stepped forward, pulling out his wallet. "Here," he said, handing her a few bills. "Get yourself something warm. Food, clothes, whatever you need." Ruth looked at the money, but didn't take it. Instead, she gently pushed his hand back. "I'm okay," she said. Daniel blinked. "You're okay?" She nodded. "There are people who need it more." That did something to Matthew. Something uncomfortable. Something honest. Because for the first time in a long time, he couldn't remember the last time he had given anything without expecting something in return. "Can I pray for you?" Ruth asked suddenly. Matthew froze. For him? People lined up by the thousands for him to pray over them. And yet here he was, being asked by a child with nothing. He nodded slowly. Ruth closed her eyes. "God," she whispered, her voice steady despite everything. "Please help him." Matthew waited. For wealth? For protection? For success? But she didn't say any of that. "Help his heart feel full again," she continued, "and remind him he's not alone." Silence followed, but it wasn't empty. It was heavy, real. Matthew turned away slightly, swallowing hard. For a brief moment, a memory flashed. Bright lights, applause, standing ovations. A younger version of himself, smiling, alive, certain. Back when his faith wasn't a performance, back when it meant something. Now, he had everything. And somehow, nothing. Angela Carter stood across the street, watching, nervously. Ruth's mother. Tired eyes, worn jacket, pride wrapped tightly around years of struggle. When she saw Matthew talking to her daughter, she rushed over. "Ruth!" she snapped. "I told you not to wander off like this!" She looked at Matthew, immediately defensive. "I'm sorry if she bothered you, sir. She doesn't mean any harm." "She didn't bother me," Matthew said gently. "She reminded me." Angela frowned, confused. "Of what?" Matthew looked at Ruth. Then, back at Angela, of what faith is supposed to look like. Angela didn't respond, because part of her wanted to believe that, and another part was too afraid to. And maybe, just maybe, that's where the real story begins. Because sometimes, the people we overlook carry the kind of faith we lost along the way. And if a child like Ruth can still believe in something bigger, maybe there's something in you that still does too. That night, Prophet Matthew Wilson didn't sleep, not because of the storm, not because of the revival, but because of a little girl who had nothing, and somehow spoke like she had everything. By morning, Cabana Mancio was alive again. Staff moved with precision. Phones rang. Schedules filled. The machine of his empire kept running. But Matthew wasn't in it. "Cancel my afternoon meetings," he said quietly. Daniel blinked. "Sir, you have a donor conference and—" "Cancel it." There was no hesitation this time, because for the first time in years, something mattered more than appearances. He didn't go with security, didn't take the usual convoy, just a plain black SUV and silence. "Don't announce me," he told the driver, "and don't follow too close." Buffalo looked different without tinted windows and distance. More real, more honest. They found her again near the same Wegmans. But this time, Matthew didn't approach. He stayed back. Watched. Ruth sat on the curb again, same worn clothes, same calm presence. In her hands was a small paper bag. Lunch, and just like that, she gave half of it away. A man sitting beside her, older, tired, barely holding himself together, took the food with shaking hands. "Thank you," he whispered. Ruth just smiled. Like it wasn't a sacrifice. Like it was normal. Matthew felt something twist inside him, because he couldn't remember the last time he had given anything that actually cost him something. "Sir," Daniel's voice came softly from the back seat. "This isn't necessary. We already know her situation." "Do we?" Matthew asked, without looking away. They followed at a distance. Ruth eventually stood, brushed her hands, and began walking, not toward shelters, not toward help, but toward a neighborhood most people in Buffalo drove past without noticing. Small buildings, faded paint, broken sidewalks. They stopped near a corner store, a Dollar General. Ruth slipped inside a narrow apartment building next door. Matthew stepped out slowly this time. No cameras, no attention, just inside. The hallway smelled faintly of cleaning supplies and old carpet. Angela Carter was there, mop in hand. Another job, another shift. Her shoulders were heavy, but she kept moving. When she saw Matthew, she froze. "Sir?" she said, startled. Matthew looked around. At the worn walls, at the quiet struggle written into every corner. "I just wanted to understand," he said. Angela let out a small, tired laugh. "There's not much to understand," she replied. "Bills don't care how hard you work." Matthew didn't respond, because for once, he didn't have an answer. Later that evening, he waited outside, hidden in the dim light, watching, learning, and that's when he saw it. Ruth again, back outside. But this time, she wasn't talking to anyone. She was kneeling, right there on the cracked sidewalk, hands clasped, eyes closed, praying. Matthew stepped closer, just enough to hear. Her voice was softer tonight, more personal. "God," she whispered, "if you don't want to fix his life, it's okay." Matthew's chest tightened. He didn't move. Just don't let him feel alone anymore. Silence. The kind that settles deep, the kind that doesn't leave quickly. Matthew looked down. Rainwater still clung to the pavement from the night before. And suddenly, something inside him broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. Because for the first time, someone wasn't asking God to give him more. They were asking God to heal something he had been hiding for years. He turned away quickly, ran a hand over his face, tried to steady himself, but it was no use. Because in that moment, He realized something he had spent his whole life avoiding. He didn't just want answers anymore. He didn't just want power, or influence, or even the image of faith. He wanted something real, something that couldn't be bought, something that didn't need a stage. He wanted what she had. Back in the SUV, Daniel finally spoke. "Sir, what is this really about?" Matthew stared out the window. At the city. At the people. At the life he had been too distant to see. And for the first time, his voice didn't sound like a man in control. "I thought I needed a miracle," he said quietly. He paused, then added, "But maybe—" His jaw tightened slightly. "Maybe I just need meaning." And somewhere behind them, on a quiet Buffalo street, a little girl finished her prayer, unaware that she had just changed everything. The next morning, everything changed. Not slowly, not quietly, but all at once. Cabana Mancio was already buzzing before sunrise. Phones ringing, assistants moving quickly, schedules being rewritten. Because Prophet Matthew Wilson had made a decision, and no one understood it. "I want them here today," Matthew said, standing in the center of his office. Daniel stared at him. "Sir, you mean the woman and the girl?" "Yes." Daniel hesitated. "For what purpose exactly?" Matthew didn't look away. "To ask her something." By noon, Angela Carter stood inside a building she had only ever cleaned. But today, she wasn't holding a mop. She stood in the center of a polished conference room, glass walls, city views, executives watching from a distance like something unusual was unfolding. Because it was. Ruth stood beside her, calm as always. Matthew walked in. No grand entrance. No performance. Just intention. "Angela," he said. His voice was steady but different. Not authoritative. Not distant. Human. Angela crossed her arms instinctively. "If this is about money, sir, you don't have to—" "It's not." That stopped her. Matthew took a breath. "I want to build something real," he said. "A life. Not a moment. Not charity. Not a story for the cameras." Angela's expression hardened slightly. "People like you don't build lives with people like us," she said. Matthew nodded. "You're right," he admitted. "But maybe that's exactly what needs to change." Silence filled the room. Then he said it. "I want you to come live at Cabana Mancio. With Ruth." Gasps. Whispers. Outside the glass walls, employees paused. Phones stopped. Eyes widened. Angela blinked. "I'm not asking out of pity," Matthew continued. "And I'm not offering a transaction." His voice softened. "I'm asking because I don't want to live another day surrounded by everything and still feel nothing." Angela shook her head slowly. "No," she said. The word came fast. Defensive. Protective. "No. I've seen how this goes. People like me, we become stories. Headlines. Charity cases." Her voice cracked slightly. "I won't let my daughter grow up feeling like she was rescued." Matthew didn't interrupt. Because, for once, he understood. Outside, whispers grew louder. "Is this real? He's bringing them into his house? This is going to be all over the news." Phones were already out. Messages sent. Speculation spreading. Buffalo had just been handed a story it wouldn't ignore. Angela stepped back. "This isn't a fairy tale," she said. "It's real life. And real life doesn't work like this." Ruth gently tugged her sleeve. "Mom." Angela looked down. Ruth's eyes were steady. Not confused. Not overwhelmed. "Certain. He's not trying to save us," Ruth said softly. Angela frowned. "Then what is he doing?" Ruth looked at Matthew, then back at her mother. "He's trying to stop being alone." That hit harder than anything else. Because Angela knew that feeling too well. Long nights. Empty rooms. Carrying everything alone. She had just learned how to survive it. He hadn't. Matthew took a step closer. "I don't need you to believe me right away," he said. But I need you to know this isn't about fixing you." He paused. "It's about fixing something in me. Silence. Real silence. The kind where decisions are made." Angela looked around the room, at the polished floors, the watching eyes, the invisible line between her world and his. Then she looked at Ruth, and saw something she hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. Not loud, not desperate, but steady. Angela exhaled slowly. "This isn't about money," she said quietly. Matthew shook his head. "No." She looked at Ruth again, then back at him. "Okay," she said. Gasps again. Louder this time. "But not for you," she added. Matthew nodded. "I understand." Angela placed a hand on Ruth's shoulder. "I'm saying yes, because she believes something I forgot how to." Outside, the story exploded. Inside, something else did too. And maybe that's the part most people don't talk about. Because it's easy to believe in love when life is comfortable. But when everything is uncertain, when the risk is real, when the outcome isn't guaranteed, and someone still chooses to trust, that's the kind of courage most people spend their whole lives running from. The wedding wasn't announced. No press, no cameras, no stage. Just a quiet morning in Buffalo City, under a sky that couldn't decide between gray and light. And then the rain came back, soft this time, gentle, like a memory. In the garden of Cabana Mancio, a small group gathered. No executives, no headlines, just a few witnesses. And something real. Angela stood in a simple white dress, nothing extravagant, nothing borrowed from wealth. Just her. Honest. Grounded. Matthew stood across from her, no longer looking like the untouchable prophet the world knew. Just a man. Present. Ruth stood between them, barefoot in the grass, eyes closed, hands clasped, praying. The ceremony was short. No long speeches. No performance. Just vows that didn't try to impress anyone. "I don't have all the answers," Matthew said quietly, "but I know I don't want to live another day without something real." Angela's voice trembled slightly. "I don't know how this ends," she admitted, "but I'm willing to believe it starts with trust." And just like that, they stepped into something neither of them fully understood. The rain continued. Soft, steady, almost like the night they met. Ruth never opened her eyes. Not once. Not during the vows. Not during the silence. She just kept praying. Days passed. Then a week. Life didn't transform overnight. It shifted. Quietly, Matthew found himself doing things he had never done before. Sitting at a kitchen table, eating simple meals, listening, instead of speaking. Angela moved through the house differently, too. Not like someone who had been given something, but like someone who had chosen to step into it. And Ruth? She didn't change at all. Still soft-spoken. Still present. Still certain. Then one morning, it happened. Matthew sat near the window, a cup of coffee in his hands. The city stretched out beyond the glass. Familiar. Distant. The same. And then, something wasn't. He blinked. Once. Twice. His hand tightened slightly around the cup. "Angela?" he said slowly. She looked up. "What is it?" Matthew didn't answer immediately, because he wasn't sure. Not yet. But there it was again. Faint. Subtle. A shift. Light. He hesitated. "I think I see something." Angela froze. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," he said, his voice unsteady now. "It's not clear, but it's there." Doctors were called. Tests were run. Specialists flew in. The results? Unexplainable. "There's activity," one doctor said, reviewing scans. "Minimal, but real. This shouldn't be happening." Another shook his head. "We don't have a medical explanation for this level of recovery." But the truth was, the real miracle had already happened. Before the light. Before the tests. Before the proof. Because Matthew was already different. He laughed more. Listened longer. Walked through the city without distance. No convoy, no separation. Cabana Mancio changed too. Rooms once filled with silence, now filled with purpose. Community programs began. Food drives, shelter partnerships, local outreach across Buffalo. Not announcements, actions. Angela no longer moved like someone surviving. She stood with dignity, ownership, peace. And Ruth? She still prayed, in the same quiet way, for the same people, with the same belief. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the city, Matthew sat beside her, watching her, learning. "Ruth," he said gently. She looked up. "Yes?" He hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Did you really heal me?" Ruth smiled, not surprised, not proud, just certain. "No," she said softly. Matthew frowned slightly. "No?" She shook her head, and then said the one thing that would stay with him forever. "You just stopped being blind." Silence settled between them. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was full. And maybe that's what this was always about. Not just sight, not just miracles, but something deeper, something harder to explain. Because if this story moved something in you, not because of what happened, but because of what it meant, the love, the faith, the second chances, then maybe that feeling matters. Maybe it's the part of you that still believes people can change, that hearts can heal, and that sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths. If you love this story, don't just scroll away, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from and which part of the story hit you the hardest. We've got more powerful, emotional stories coming your way, and trust me, you don't want to miss them.